I'm not sure any set of fans have experienced such highs and lows as Leicester City supporters in the past decade. Just over 10 years ago, Leicester were pretty much your average championship side, having spent 10 years in the second tier with a brief detour in League One. Then came promotion, an unlikely survival, and then that season. A Premier League title, 5,000 to 1. A team which captured the hearts and minds of every football fan. But the success didn't stop there. What followed was a Champions League run, consecutive 5th place finishes, an FA Cup, a Community Shield, and more European adventures. But the wheels well and truly came off with their shock relegation in 2023. And now Leicester City find themselves in danger of becoming your average championship side once again, which is by no means a bad thing, but considering where they were just a few years ago, it's an incredible fall from grace. So where's it all gone wrong and what next for the Foxes? Let's find out. I'm Ryan Dilks from the second tier, and this is the rise and fall of Leicester City. To find the start of Leicester's downfall, you have to go back further than you think. In fact, you have to go back to the start of one of their most successful seasons in club history. The 2020-21 season saw Leicester win the FA Cup for the first time and finish 5th in the Premier League for the second season in a row. They had begun to establish themselves as a genuine contender for Champions League football. The squad was arguably the strongest it had ever been as well. You had a perfect mix of players who were legends at the club like Jamie Vardy and Kasper Schmeichel, but also exciting new talents like James Maddison, Yuri Tielemans and Harvey Barnes. On the pitch, things were amazing. But off the pitch, you see, at the start of 2020 there was this small thing which you may have heard of which caused a few issues. It was called COVID. The pandemic hit a lot of clubs hard, but I don't think there was a single club who got hit harder by it than Leicester City. For those who aren't aware, Leicester's owners, King Power, they call themselves the Kings of Duty Free. You know, duty free that you see at airports. So when there's a global pandemic stopping people from going to airports and flying, you can see how that would be inconvenient to their business. And the timing of it could not have been worse. Literally, the year before the pandemic, Leicester started work on a new £100 million training facility. So money was already tight. And while the 2020-21 campaign was probably the club's second most successful season in its history, it may have also been the most costly. You see, Leicester had spent virtually the entirety of the season in the top 4 but missed out on Champions League football on the final day. If they had secured Champions League football, money may not have been as much of an issue for years to come. Leicester would finish 8th in the fairly uneventful 2021-22 campaign, but from this moment onwards is when the off-the-pitch matters started to filter onto the pitch. In the summer of 2022, manager Brendan Rodgers was told there wouldn't be any new signings unless players left. And you could probably understand why when you look at the club's finances. They were spending £206 million on wages when they were only making £177 million in revenue. Also got to be mentioned that Leicester's recruitment was some of the best in the world in the 2010s. You think of Jamie Vardy, N'Golo Kante, Riyad Mahrez, etc, etc. But around 2020, things had seriously started to go awry. There were several players who were signed for big money and just didn't perform. They were then surplus to requirements and very difficult to move on. But also on the flip side, several players were signed for big money and did well. But in the 22-23 season, they were entering the final years of their contracts and were set to leave on free transfers. Leicester ended up heading into that season with just 2 new players, and Brendan Rodgers was warning people of a challenging campaign, something which caught many by by surprise, but ended up being something of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Leicester would win just 1 point from their first 7 games. There would be a brief upturn in form before the break for the 2022 World Cup, but would come back and lose 12 of their next 16 games. Rodgers was eventually sacked and Dean Smith was brought in to try and guide them to safety, but it was too little, too late, and Leicester would be relegated, becoming only the second side after Blackburn Rovers to win the Premier League and then get relegated. Even though there were hardly any new signings, Leicester still had a very talented squad. So how did everything go so wrong? Well, there's a multitude of reasons why. Most of them seem to stem back to Brendan Rodgers. He seemed much more negative when speaking to the media after being told he wouldn't be allowed to sign many players in the summer prior, and that may have had some sort of a knock-on effect when it came to the players. Pretty much everyone underperformed this season. Many players who were frozen out were unexpectedly brought back in as part of a desperate attempt to try and turn things around. The departure of club legend Kasper Schmeichel turned out to be a disastrous decision, with every goalkeeper Leicester used after that playing really poorly. He was a big loss in terms of leadership as well. You still had Jamie Vardy and Johnny Evans at the club, but Rodgers was using them sparingly throughout the season. And perhaps the biggest mistake made by the club was keeping Rodgers on for too long. He was finally sacked with just 10 games to go, but Leicester were 19th by that point. It was an astonishingly quick fall from grace for Leicester City. How many times have we seen a team win the FA Cup and finish 5th in the same season to being relegated just 2 years later? For that to happen in modern football as well makes it even more remarkable. Even though this was a season where so many things went wrong, it's still astonishing that Leicester actually went down. In my eyes, it's without a doubt the strongest squad to ever get relegated from the Premier League. You look at the players they had there: James Maddison, Harvey Barnes, Yuri Tielemans, Timothy Castagna, so many others I could name here. And whether you agree with me or not when it comes to whether this is the most talented team to ever get relegated from the Premier League, it is without a doubt the most expensive. And if Leicester thought they had problems before, well, they were just getting started, because Leicester were heading into the Championship with an average wage bill of £200 million. Keeping in mind the average income for a Championship side is around 30 million. They also had a squad which ended the 2022-23 season with, by my count, 34 players on the books, so they obviously needed a big clear out. 11 players ended up leaving, including James Maddison and Harvey Barnes, for a combined £75 million, although it would turn out 11 players leaving still wouldn't be enough, but more on that later. Despite so many players going, this squad was still so strong at Championship level. Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, Wilfred Ndidi, Ricardo Pereira, I could go on. Which is why it makes it even more questionable that Leicester felt the need to spend £38 million on new players. They got in Mads Hermansen, Connor Cody, Harry Winks, Steffi Marididi and Tom Cannon. Now, I'm no business expert, but spending £38 million when you've already got large bills to pay doesn't seem like the greatest of ideas, particularly when 2 of those players barely featured that season. So Leicester had to get promoted. Fortunately for them, they had one of the strongest squads the Championship has ever seen, and Pep Guardiola's former assistant Enzo Maresca to guide them. And despite a bit of a wobble near the end of the season, they managed to do it relatively comfortably. However, despite getting promoted, problems were coming at them from all angles. Towards the end of their promotion-winning season, Leicester were charged with breaching profit and sustainability rules by the Premier League in their relegation season. There was also concern about them complying going forwards, which forced them to sell Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, their star player. As well as that, Enzo Maresca had been poached by Chelsea. It left Leicester without a manager, without the best player, and potentially facing a points deduction. Yeah, basically the worst possible preparation for a newly promoted side. In time, Leicester would successfully appeal against that PSR charge, but it wasn't an ideal thing to have hanging over them throughout the entire summer. And because of the windows for when a new PSR year starts, it meant Leicester couldn't start signing players until the start of July. They would go on to spend £70 million that summer, much less than fellow newly promoted sides Ipswich and Southampton. They also appointed Steve Cooper as their new manager to replace Maresca, a decision which didn't go down very well with Leicester fans considering his links to East Midlands rivals Nottingham Forest. But Leicester didn't start the season too badly. They only lost 6 of their first 12 games, despite having a really tough fixture schedule, and found themselves sat 16th. So maybe this was the perfect opportunity to stabilise after a really turbulent Yep, Steve Cooper was sacked, a decision which many still find baffling to this day, particularly considering we all know what happened afterwards. Leicester fans will tell you that they never took to Cooper and the football wasn't great either. There were also reports of him not getting on with certain players, and those claims were not helped by a video being leaked of Leicester's players being in a nightclub with a sign that said, "Enzo, I miss you," just hours before Cooper was sacked. And so Cooper was replaced by Ruud van Nistelrooy, who was just coming off the back of a spell as caretaker manager at Manchester United, and he was an absolute disaster. 18 losses in 25 games followed, including Leicester becoming the first side in Football League history to lose 8 games at home without scoring a single goal. And Leicester would be comfortably relegated with 5 games to go. And just to add insult to injury, not long afterwards, Leicester would once again be charged with breaching PSR rules, leaving them at risk of getting a points deduction in the Championship this coming season. Look, it was always going to be difficult for Leicester to stay up in the Premier League, particularly when the gap between the top flight and the Championship is the biggest that it's ever been, but the manner in which it's happened has only frustrated fans further. Many are still furious about relegation the first time around, but the disillusionment is palpable now, which led to fans flying a banner over the King Power Stadium saying, "King Power clueless, sack the board." So who is to blame here? Well, there is a lot of blame to go around, which we'll get onto very shortly. Timing has really not been kind to Leicester. Obviously, as mentioned earlier, there was the pandemic which hit Leicester like a ton of bricks, particularly when they were trying to pay off their new fancy state-of-the-art training facility. That played such a big part in their initial relegation, and the timing of the relegation itself could not have been worse. Since then, we've had back-to-back seasons of all 3 newly promoted sides being relegated from the Premier League. If Leicester managed to stay up in 2023, there's a very good chance that they would have been fine after that. Considering Everton and Nottingham Forest both suffered points deductions the season afterwards and comfortably stayed up, Leicester would have likely been able to stay up in the Premier League and just recover while staying in the top flight. I know that's all hypothetical, but just to make the timing even worse, they got relegated just as the gap between the Premier League and the Championship got to the biggest it's ever been. If they got relegated a season earlier, they may have been able to bounce back and then stay up. But instead, it's like they managed to find the biting point of being relegated at the worst possible time, particularly because it obviously happens during the height of their spending. It may be a while before we see a team get relegated again with a £200 million wage bill, but that's because Leicester were trying to compete with the big boys in the Premier League and were doing so for a long time. But bad decision making has massively cost them. And that list of bad decisions in the past 3 years is a long one. That's probably a video in itself. So who's to blame? Well, the director of football, John Rudkin, seems to be the main one for Leicester fans, and it's easy to see why. He was in that role throughout Leicester's golden years, but poor recruitment, poor handling of player contracts, multiple clashes with PSR rules, and not sacking Brendan Rodgers earlier has ultimately left Leicester in the mess they're currently in. I think Brendan Rodgers deserves a shout because obviously while he's not been at Leicester over the past couple of years, he definitely played a big part in pushing that first domino over. Another person who gets a lot of criticism is the owner, Kuhn Top. There's been questions over why he stuck with Rudkin and many others over the years, and whether he's still committed to the club. So what next for Leicester? Well, the future is looking very, very unclear for them. They're obviously going to be back in the Championship next season with a potential points deduction hanging over them. If they do get a points deduction, a minimum of 12 points has been reported, which would all but rule them out of getting automatically promoted. But whether they get one or not, it's going to be hard to attract players with the possibility of one lingering in the background. It also means it's going to be difficult to hold on to the players that they do have. We also don't know whether Leicester will have any money to spend. Could you blame the owner for not wanting to waste any more money, even though he is partly to blame for that? The threat of having any more scuffles with the PSR rules as well might mean there might not be any money to spend anyway. So a lot of questions which are very difficult to answer at this very moment in time, but what does feel like the case is it's very much the end of an era. For Leicester City, you had the golden years between 2015 and 2021, and then the rapid decline from 2021 to the present day. The departure of Jamie Vardy means everyone from that Premier League winning side has now left the club, which isn't a huge surprise considering it was nearly 10 years ago. But there's only a handful of players left from the FA Cup winning side, and that was only 4 years ago. Now seems like the perfect time for Leicester City to properly hit the reset button and reset everything from top to bottom. There needs to be a big change in the boardroom, starting with the owner, Kuhn Top, who needs to publicly commit to turning things around at Leicester or putting the club up for sale. Whatever decision he makes in that regard, he needs to get rid of John Rudkin. How many mistakes as a director of football can you keep making before you get told enough is enough. In terms of the playing squad, Leicester have got to cut that down. It's unclear what the wage bill is looking like nowadays, but it can't have been cut that much, and that's been what's been causing them a world of bother over the past few years. So they have to focus on getting players out instead of bringing them in, which means expectations have to be scaled back. A points deduction may make this happen anyway, but I think Leicester need to view this coming season as a transition year. Yeah, getting promoted would be great and it would certainly help in terms of their financial position, but the only way that seems possible is by them once again gambling when it comes to the PSR rules. And how many times can you keep doing that with very little success? Just over 10 years ago, Leicester City were your average championship side. And what they've experienced since then is a pipe dream for every fan of every championship club, and maybe even plenty of Premier League sides as well. But now it looks as if Leicester may have to accept being back in that position they were in all those years ago, because they're hitting the reset button and they're having to rebuild all over again. So there we have it. This has been the rise and fall of Leicester City, possibly the sharpest rise and fall any team will ever experience for some time in English football. Where do you think Leicester City will finish this coming season? Let me know in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure you like and subscribe for more content like this. I've been Dilks from the Second Tier, and a big thank you for watching.